Welcome to the Next Level AppSec webinar with Forward Security and Semgrep. We want to talk about transforming secure development with Semgrep and the Eureka DevSecOps Platform. Farshad, would you like to introduce yourself and tell everyone about you?
Sounds good. Sounds good. Hi, everybody. My name is Farshad Abasi, and as we were talking about earlier, I hail from Vancouver, British Columbia. We're the West Coast. I've been building and securing software for way too long. I think 27 years now. Wow. Spent the first half of my career writing software and the other half of it helping people secure the software. It's been quite an interesting journey. I've worked with all shapes and sizes of software, from drivers all the way to web applications and desktop applications. And I've seen all the problems that, you name the hack, it happened to software that I wrote, and learned hard lessons that now I bring those lessons to developers and help them build more secure software. So yeah, that's it about me. How about yourself, Tanya?
Awesome. I love it. So I'm Tanya Janca, also known as She Hacks Purple, and I work at Semgrep now. And so I started a little company called We Hack Purple, which gave secure coding training, and Semgrep bought us this year. Yes. And now I am the head of education and community at Semgrep, and I'm very excited. We are doing a lot of exciting stuff, which I'm going to talk about later, not now, because now I wanted to talk about why you and I are here. So it's funny, we've been planning for this webinar for a few weeks, and every time Farshad and I get on a call, we're like, no.
We like to talk a lot.
And the marketing folks must be really annoying with us because we're just like talking shop the whole time. And you and I were talking about all sorts of things, but I was wondering if you wanted to talk about what we call alphabet soup.
Don't even get me started. It gets more and more confusing, and I remember when I worked at HSBC for 9 years. I helped roll out their application security program. And one of the things we did was to look at automation tools. And me, I wasn't green. I'd been in the field for quite a while. And then I started looking at the automation tools and my head started spinning. It was like, well, there's SAST and DAST and SCA. I kind of understood those three. But then there was IAST and RASP, and they kept adding the acronyms. And so as a security practitioner, I had a hard time knowing what all those things are, let alone, the clients or the development teams that are so busy just trying to build things. They don't have time to sit there and figure out what all these things are. And yeah, so I mean, this is a common problem everywhere. People are having a tough time knowing what tools to get. And even if they understand it, there are so many vendors offering so many kinds of each of them, right? What has your experience been?
No, it's the same thing. So I do consulting. So this might sound odd, but I do 1 hour of consulting a week for this company called IANS Research. And I've done it since 2018. And as a result, I've worked with over 400 AppSec teams now, just helping them like crush problems. And constantly, it's like, well, what's the difference between an ASOC and an ASPM? Is this SCA or is this SAST? Can you wait? Aren't they all static? What? And it's very frustrating. And then we have vendors who are muddying the waters. Like I did a video recently called "What's the difference between an ASOC, so application security orchestration and correlation, versus ASPM, application security posture management?" And then one of the vendors came in, who will remain unnamed, was like, actually, it includes cloud security and and he added like this list of stuff. And I was like, no, that's a CSPM. No, you can't change all the rules on me, mister, because then I don't know what to say to my clients anymore. And I was just like, and then he started like linking white papers he's written. And I'm just like, please get off my thread. Now everyone's confused.
Yeah, it's funny. I think it was like last year or this year when I went to RSA. And then CSPM, I was like, what is that? I thought I knew everything, and there's a new acronym. I'm like, why do we have these acronyms? CSPM, ASPM, I don't even know what they do. So, you have to put a lot of time into it to figure these things out. And I mean, people like you and I, we take that knowledge back, and through our consulting, we help others make sense out of it. But there's lots of people that don't have access to folks like you and I. And, they're sitting there trying to figure out what to do. And even teams that do deploy these things, I remember at the bank, we ended up buying check marks and contrast and a bunch of other stuff. AppScan, we put it all in their pipelines and their environments. I would go talk to the developers. I'm like, hey, how's it going with all these expensive tools we bought you? they're like, we didn't really know how they work, so we just turned them off. They were bypassing the pipelines. They were just, just because the tools weren't working and they didn't understand them, they just decided to turn them off. And then they were getting false positive fatigue, which is a disease, an illness in our industry we could talk about as well. So.
Yes, so that's actually what I wanted to talk to you about next. So like false positives. So I feel like everyone has a bit of a different definition of what a false positive is. Did you want to talk about it? Or do you want me to talk about it?
Please go ahead and start that conversation. It's a very controversial.
Yeah. Okay. So from a technical standpoint, a false positive means it has reported a result to you. So some sort of tool, some sort of test has reported a result to you, and it's not true. So it says that there is a bug here when there's not actually a bug there. However, a lot of these tools will report things, and I'm like, yes, that is true, but that does not cause me actual business risk. That's not exploitable, or like, thanks for the information there, buddy, but I'm going to ignore you because you also spit out 20,000 other results, and I don't have time for this crap. But it's true. We have so much work to do, right? Like, I don't know an AppSec person who's like, you know what, I'm really bored at work and I don't have enough to do.
Oh, but I read somewhere for every 100 developers, there's one AppSec person. And that's just a huge problem globally.
So I read that too. And then, so much more terrifying. So GitHub, who I feel of all of the organizations on the planet can definitely speak to this. So in early 2022, they released a new article saying that there's 500 software developers for every information security professional. No way. And I was just like, but okay, but back to false positives. So what about, okay, so when you and I will go work somewhere, we'll work with a company and we're looking at results. It took me a while as an AppSec person to be able to say, oh, just throw those ones away. We're not fixing those. These are the ones I need you to fix like right now. And then those ones, let's go in the backlog. And maybe, when you do, the next couple of sprints, you can chip away at this. How do we decide that? Like, what types of context or other information do we want?
Yeah, a lot of people just sit there manually triaging every single one of them, figuring out, hey, here's a vulnerability. Is this actually reachable? And then if it is, what is the impact? Like, they have to calculate risk, right? At the end, and a lot of people don't know how to do it. So what they end up doing is looking at using the severities and doing a whole bunch of manual work to figuring out if that severity is actually relevant to them. Really, what they should be doing is like starting out by understanding what kind of data that software is handling and how impactful that data is. Is it credit cards? Is it PII? What would be the impact? And then using the impact and then the likelihood to calculate the risk. That's fairly time consuming, right? And developers don't even know how to do it. At HSBC, we would just like, the very few AppSec people that were there would help the developers, but there was only a small handful of us and there were hundreds of teams. So we were only able to give attention to the flagship products, and the rest of them were left to fend on their own because it's such a manual and time-consuming process, right? And then, of course, you have to do the threat modeling because okay, so you triage that one vulnerability, but so what? Can it be combined with other vulnerabilities? And then that became more work for the AppSec team because we had to go and do whiteboarding and threat modeling, which is super time-consuming. But really, that's what you have to do. And there are just not enough people to do it, and there haven't been many tools up to this point that can help automate it. But we have some solutions.
Can you briefly tell us what threat modeling is, just super briefly, in case someone's on the call and they don't know?
Threat modeling, yeah, it's so funny, Tanya. I got introduced to it back in 2008 when I got my first AppSec job. I'd never even heard of it, and in the requirements in the job description, it said threat modeling. So I went and bought Adam Shostak's book. And I was like, all right, I got this job interview coming. I got this Microsoft threat modeling book. Let's go. And as soon as I got the job, they were like, okay, welcome. And your first project, you're going to do threat modeling. And then they just kind of threw me in the ocean. No idea, like, aside from what I'd read in that book. And I think that first product, I identified 80 threat scenarios because I just didn't know what I was doing. I just wrote up every hypothetical threat scenario that was possible. But back to your question, what is threat modeling? So I guess the threat modeling is a process by which you identify different attack pathways that an attacker could leverage to be able to exploit or gain access to your sensitive data or the functions of that application. And what you do is I always use this analogy when I'm explaining this. I say, hey, people, have you seen the movie Ocean's 11? And a lot of people are like, yeah, I've seen it. And in that movie, what they do is they take the blueprint of the casinos and then they figure out what are the different possibilities. Hey, can we go through this back door? And then is this other door, does it have a lock? And if we go through this, do we get to the big vault with the gold, right? So they put that blueprint in front of them and they model all the different pathways that they can attack that casino. That's what threat modeling is. You take a blueprint of a system, often a data flow diagram, or better yet, something that's a little bit more detailed, and you identify what are all the different attack pathways. How can an attacker come in? Where's the front door? Oh yeah, there's an input path here, and then I can go to this service, and then there's a vulnerability I can exploit. And from there, I can go to another service, exploit that other vulnerability, and then I've got access to your data. So it's really doing that, like playing, pretending you're in Ocean's 11, putting the blueprint of the application in front of you and hunting for those different attack pathways, right? But one of the challenges when it comes to software, like the traditional threat modeling, really focuses on the sort of the physical topology side of things using data flow diagrams. And it doesn't really dig in to the threat scenarios that can occur within each component. So for developers, it's recommended that you go a bit lower and look within that component and see what are the possibilities within a particular monolith service or microservice or whatever you may have. So I'll stop there, but I'd love to hear from you on this topic as well, Tanya, because you have quite a bit of expertise in it.
I do enjoy a good threat model. Before I talk more, because I'll talk to the audience doesn't know, I will talk to Farshad for like 8 straight hours if I am allowed. So if you have questions in the chat, you're also allowed to ask him and I questions. It doesn't just have to be us. And I was supposed to say that at the beginning, but anyway. Okay, so I feel the same way about threat modeling that you do. We're trying to identify potential threats to the system that we're looking at, and then plan to mitigate them if we think there's a likelihood that it's worth doing. So sometimes there's a threat like a meteorite could hit our data center. Okay, so we're probably not going to mitigate that by creating like some sort of Star Wars scenario with spaceships, right? Like that's an unlikely threat. So we're probably going to accept that risk. But usually threats are more apparent or obvious, especially so there's technical threats, and then there's like threat actors, which you and I were talking about yesterday, because I made all these excuses to hang out with Farshad.
We like talking about these.
Just chatted his ear off. But so for instance, like I worked at Elections Canada. One of the things that they worry about is voter suppression, is people trying to trick voters who are going to vote for the party they don't want them to not vote, right? And so some of the risks you have are as an organization, like from specific actors because you do a certain business model, while some are technical. So, and some are obvious, like, is there money? I bet someone's going to try to steal that money.
Totally. And it's really, to your point, it's really important to identify the attackers of concern, because why bother coming up with every hypothetical scenario if it's not based on an attacker that is interested in what you have. And if you haven't done that, then you're really like, that was me at the beginning. I didn't know, right? So I just wrote every possible threat scenario, but now I know better. I always start now with doing a business impact assessment, including sitting down with the development team saying, hey, you're building this, what kind of assets is this thing handling and who's interested in it? And, together identifying those, potential attackers, and based on the attackers and the asset at risk, then fine tuning the threat modeling and only, writing down things that are relevant given that context. And of course, calculating the risk after, right? Because it's one thing to come up with all these threat scenarios, say, hey, I have 10 threat scenarios and the number one involves these 6 vulnerabilities or whatever. But then the developers are like, okay, that's great. Which ones do we address? What do we fix? And that's where the risk assessment part comes in, right? So that, leveraging the impact information that you got from the development team, and then looking at how exploitable, discoverable, repeatable that chain of vulnerabilities is, and determining a level of likelihood, and then combining that together to come up with risk. Now you can say, hey, these 10 threat scenarios, the first 3 are high risk. That means, hey, the vulnerabilities that are linked to those threat scenarios, you got to fix those right away. And often there's like 1 or 2 vulnerabilities in that chain that are the most important. Developers ask me, hey, like, should I fix everything in that threat scenario, like all the vulnerabilities in the chain? My answer is ideally, yeah. But if you break that chain even with 1 or 2 of the vulnerabilities, then you've done well, because now the attack is not, possible. But you still have those, hanging vulnerabilities that could later be chained up with something else. So at the end, try to fix it all. But I understand, hey, developer, that you don't have time. So fix the most critical ones in that attack pathway and go from there.
Yes. Okay, so there's a question in the chat, and I swear I did not tell the person to ask this. Can you tell us a little bit about the difference between Semgrep Free and Semgrep Pro, which is the paid version, and what kind of value it provides, and what is the best way to leverage the tool? Thanks in advance. Okay, so there are a bunch of differences. Like you get features like SSO, and you get like role-based access control and stuff like that with the paid one. But the two main things from a nerdy perspective, as opposed to like I'm a customer, I want fancy features perspective, is you can do cross-file analysis. So the free version will look at a file and tell you if there's bugs in it. Whereas the paid version can look across like 5, 6, or 7 files and tell you, oh, it starts here, but then that's where we sync that. And that's where your cross-site scripting is in your toast. So go back here and validate that input and then output it coded over here, and then you'll be better. So cross-file analysis, so chasing a vulnerability across multiple files. And then the other thing that you get, like the main thing with the Pro engine, is you get our Pro rules. And so when you get the OSS version, you get all these rules that the community made. And there are some false, like legit false positives going on there. And there's also a lot of false negatives. There's not a rule for every single thing. And we don't cover every single language like C and C++, things like that. Whereas with the Pro engine, we cover, I can't remember, like 30 something languages. And then we have a giant team of experts testing every single one of those rules. So you're paying for us just providing way higher quality results, but plus SSO, et cetera, like fancy enterprisey features. So that's my opinion. But you're a practitioner that uses Semgrep. What's your opinion, Farshad?
We actually use Semgrep quite a bit. So I'll tell you a bit about our company. We have two sides in our company. One is consulting. So clients come to us, hey, we have some software, test it, find our vulnerabilities, help us. So on that side of the company, we use Semgrep. And it's in our tool set, and it does a great job. Even the community edition finds way better than all the other open source or community edition tools that are out there, right? It's funny, Tanya, a lot of developer teams that we talk to, they will often have SonarQube, right? And I laugh because SonarQube, it's good, it's cheap, it's like a good starting tool.
It's a quality tool.
It's a quality tool. And when it comes to security, but it's everywhere. Like a lot of dev shops we walk, because I guess they make it cheap or free, and then they're like, the dev teams don't know any better. It goes back to our original conversation at the beginning of this session about the alphabet soup, and developers don't have time to figure out what's what. They're like, hey, it seems like everyone is using SonarQube, it's cheap, let's go. But then when they put it in, they're getting a false sense of security because they're not really getting the real issues, right? So I always tell them, I'm like, yeah, it's better than nothing. Like if you had nothing, I would be worried. So you've got this as a step up, but the Semgrep Community Edition does a fantastic job. So I often refer them to that instead of SonarQube. So, the Community Edition, I was going to ask you, because it does that call flow analysis, if that's the right term, or call chain analysis within a single source file, but not across multiple source files, right? And that's one of the big differentiators. Yeah.
Yeah. I think you should use SonarQube and Semgrep.
There you go.
Because it helps you like manage technical debt. It helps, it like lints, it does lots of good stuff. It's just like, it's not a SAST. But so since we are asking lots of questions, so we were talking about false positives earlier. And so one of the things that I struggle with AppSec is scaling. And so it turns out you're not allowed cloning people. And even if you do, they don't have the AppSec experience.
Yeah. Is AI going to help with that? Can we talk about
yes.
That could be another.
But you end up with just one AppSec person or 2 AppSec people, and they can't go and look at all the results and analyze all the tools. And so you built Eureka. And part of the thing that I think is cool is that it helps give you context on these reports. So you'll do a better job of explaining this after, but it sucks up the results of lots of tools. It runs its own tools that are under the hood. And then it says, listen, like you've got all this stuff, but I think you should fix these.
Totally.
Is that accurate?
That's the goal, yeah. And just riffing on what you said earlier about running multiple tools, right? So why not? If you didn't have automation, running multiple tools would be a lot of work. And it's funny because back in, it's like late 2018, 2019, when I was just starting Forward Security, a colleague came and they wanted me to help them build secure software. And they're like, what kind of scanners do we use, right? Okay, well, that I recommended a few scanners. They said, well, why don't we use both of them? And I said, well, that would be a great idea. So I started looking on the internet, and people were like, yeah, correlation would be a great idea, but there weren't tools that really automated it. And so I went back to the client. I'm like, it's a good idea to run two scanners because they each have different rules, and one might find a problem that the other one doesn't, but there is no automation tool. So that's when the light bulb went on, and I started building this for that client. And then here we are 4 years later, and now it's a full-fledged platform that you can throw all kinds of scanners and correlate the results. And really, and there are so many different vendors, and each of them, they spend a lot of time coming up with rules, but they don't often hit everything. So that correlation really helps. Say, hey, if another tool is free or cheap, why not throw it in your arsenal if you can afford it? Or again, if it's free, it doesn't matter, right? Just put it in there and enable it. Like, let's say they had bought the Semgrep Teams edition, but there's other bunch of open source tools available. Just turn them on and see if they find issues that weren't found in those tools, right? So yeah, I think it's a good idea to combine them.
Yeah, but it also helps you spot things that might not be a true positive. So for instance, let's say you're running to SAST, or you're running to DAST, or you're running to SCAs. And sorry for the acronyms, folks. Right. And so if one's reporting it and the other one's not, that could be really helpful. But there's other context I want to know about too, though, right? Like, I want to know, is this public facing, or is it behind my firewall? It's only accessible back there. Does this have sensitive information in it? And I think you told me that. So a thing I found interesting about Eureka is that it contains information about your threat models.
Right.
And I haven't really seen that before elsewhere. A threat model is usually a document that's like saved into your code repo, or way worse, saved into a folder somewhere on a shared drive that no one ever looks at. So it's not very valuable there. So what do you do with the threat models?
So yeah, let's talk about that a bit. So remember how earlier we were saying when you do threat modeling, you got to figure out an attack pathway that involves multiple vulnerabilities. And as we said, it's usually done manually. So what we tried to do is we stepped back and looked at the problem holistically. We said, okay, well, threat scenarios combine one or more vulnerabilities. How do we identify vulnerabilities? Well, a typical team identifies vulnerabilities through automated scans, SAST, DAST, SCA, you name it. They'll do some design reviews, right? They'll do manual design reviews and find vulnerabilities. They'll have a manual pen test done, because let's face it, pen testing should be by definition manual. There's lots of people that say, oh, I've automated my pen test by definition. There's something wrong there, right? So you do some pen testing, which is manual, and a design review, and you've got your scanners. Those all produce vulnerabilities, right? From different sources. So the ideal way is to bring it all together and put them all on the table, just like the pieces of a jigsaw puzzle, throw them all there, and then now try to find the pieces that link together. And how can we automate that? So that's where the inspiration came for Eureka, is that let's make a platform that can ingest vulnerabilities from everywhere, and then figure out the linkage between them, and then allow you to do threat modeling. Because hey, if I have all the pieces of the puzzle and I can identify the ones that can join up together to create an attack pathway, there's my threat modeling. And it's even better than the traditional threat modeling, because the traditional threat modeling, you're only focusing on like the design. You're not taking into account things that are more granular that a scanner might have found, right? Like, you're just looking at high level. Hey, here's my data flow diagram or a design document. These links don't have TLS. This thing authentication is weak. That's great. You should still do that. But there's lots and lots of vulnerabilities that are reported through the scanners or the pen test that need to be part of that conversation, that are often left out in the traditional threat modeling methodologies. So that was our goal, is that, by creating this platform, you can have everything in one place. But then don't stop there, because if you just put it in one place and expect the developer to figure out the relationships, they're not going to be able to do that. So really, truly, to address this, is the next step is to automate finding the relationships, correlating them, and then mapping them to different stages of the attack. I don't know if the audience is familiar with the MITRE attack framework, but it's a framework that traditionally is used by security professionals to model those attack pathways and what happens at each step. And the typical steps are reconnaissance, initial access, elevation of privilege, exploitation, and so on and so forth, right? So security people like you and I can take a jigsaw puzzle of vulnerabilities and try to map them into these columns, figure out that attack pathway. Still takes a long time, I have to admit, right? So what the automation tries to do is figure out the linkage and then present you with where those vulnerabilities that were discovered can be used. So we say, hey, look, we found 100 vulnerabilities from your manual and automated sources, but these 5 can be used for initial access, and these 10 can be used for elevation of privilege. So we do that mapping and then put them in the Kanban style columns that that resemble the MITRE attack framework. And then that way the developer has a much easier time. They can just go and look here, say, oh yeah, here it is. These are the vulnerabilities that can be used at each stage, and this is how they can be linked together. And all they have to do is confirm, saying, hey, yeah, I agree with this, and then the system can calculate the risk. That's the nirvana that we're trying to reach here with this platform, and then help address that shortage of application security professionals, right? Because as we said earlier, what was it, GitLab that said it was 500 to 1, or was it GitHub? GitHub, right? So we're not going to be able to grow more AppSec people. Let's just face it. It's as much as, I know you do mentorship, Tanya, I know I do, and you used to promote the Mentor Mondays, and we try to mentor people. But even then, like, how many people can we mentor? How quickly can we address that shortage? It's a losing battle. And I'm trying really hard, and we're trying to mentor as many people as possible. We're not going to be able to address that huge gap, and that's where automation comes. But I want to say one more thing. It's important to recognize that automation is not going to help with all of your problems, right? I always remind people of the 80-20 rule. Say, if you put all this stuff in place, 80% of the problems will kind of go away, low-hanging fruit. But there's going to be that 20% that no matter what kind of automation, you're still going to need AppSec people. But hey, at least we eliminated 80% of the problem. And then now with a few AppSec people that are out there, they can address the other 20% that remain.
So I agree with all of that, but I have a plan to try to build more AppSec folks.
Okay.
So,
bring it on.
Announcement time, because you set me up for it and you didn't know. But
awesome.
So Semgrep is releasing the Semgrep Academy very soon.
Nice.
Early next year, we are going to have a free online academy, and all of the We Hack Purple courses that we like about how to become an AppSec engineer and secure coding are going to become free.
That's fantastic.
Yeah. And so if you want to join up on that, so I just put a link in the chat to our newsletter. So if you want to join our newsletter, we will definitely tell you when it opens up. Then there's also, if you want to join our Slack, we'll tell you there. And then also, I couldn't help but if you want to try our product, you're allowed trying it. But so yeah, and I'm already starting to like build courses about Semgrep, and we're going to build courses about all sorts of topics to help people create AppSec programs, become secure coders, basically build more secure software. And so that's going to be a huge part of my job going forward. And so I actually just like started building the courses literally this week, and I'm like, yes.
That's exciting. That's really exciting. So what sort of topics will be addressed? So
for the launch, we're going to have a little course on incident response for devs. So if you are a software developer and you spot something, it's like, is that a security incident? Should I call the security team? And like how not to do things like ruin the chain of custody and mess things up. So basically like how to spot an incident and what you should do, which spoiler alert is like, don't touch anything, call the security team, and don't go tell all your friends. And then we're going to have the Application Security Foundations program with the 3 courses where we teach you about what AppSec is and how to build a program. And you build a program throughout the 3 courses that you can bring to work with like an action plan that's 9 pages long of exactly what to do, how to execute it, etc. And then we're taking the secure coding course from We Hack Purple, and we're breaking it up so that we're going to have intro to secure coding, intro to secure design, and then the OWASP top 10, 2017 and 2021. I think I have to record the 2021 though. I don't think I have that recorded yet, but I teach it all the time. And so the idea is we want to have more bite-sized content instead of big, huge, long things like We Hack Purple did. And so I'm also building Semgrep 101.
Oh,
what
nice.
The heck is that? Yeah, and then I want to do a deep dive into what is stack analysis, and then, what are secrets? How do you find them? Why do you care? What is software composition analysis? Like, what is a supply chain? How do I secure my software supply chain? So I'm pretty excited. I basically just get to nerd out hardcore all the time and then share it all for free. So it's all going to just be 100% for free.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Not to mention the book behind you, the application security book, that also helps people learn and get into this field, right? So yeah, that's a great book. I was saying to you, I have one on my coffee table here. Thanks for, I think you gave it to me at RSA last year when you were doing the book signing. But is that all content going to be free, Tanya?
Yeah. So that's
Amazing.
the whole thing of them buying my company, because I had other companies approach me, but I didn't want to put a big gate around all the work I do. I wanted it to be free, right? And so with We Hack Purple, I had bills to pay and staff to pay, so I had to charge something. But now, because Semgrep is paying the bills, thank you, I don't have to charge anything, and I just get to give these things away for free. And so, like, part of why they made the OSS free version of their product, part of why, you know, you can use their pro version for a certain number of your devs for free, and part of why we're doing this is because we want to move the industry forward.
Yep.
And right now, a lot of companies are priced out of creating secure software. They literally can't afford to create secure software. They can't afford like these products. And so it's not that, like, I'm telling you Semgrep's really cheap, but it's trying to make it so it's obtainable. Yeah. And we still have bills to pay, but we're trying to be as efficient and effective as we can so that we have fewer bills and so that we can offer this to more people. One of the things actually I wanted to go back to, like, while we're talking about the companies we work at. So we're talking about false positives and context, and Eureka is giving lots of context, and that's important. And one of the things you and I talked about, so Semgrep's doing this new thing where original software composition analysis products, what they did is they would tell you, you have this library, you have this framework, you have this new Git package, whatever, and there's a vulnerability in it. And it's like, okay, that's nice to know, thank you. And then I'd freak out about it and not know what to do. But now what we're doing and some other companies are doing is called reachability. And so now we're telling you, okay, so you have all of these packages, these ones have vulnerabilities in them, but these two, the vulnerability that is in that package is reachable from your code. You are calling that function in your code, and you should probably be concerned. We think you should upgrade off of this not so nice, not so reliable version of this. I was
going to say that's a process that was done manually, and I've done it manually so many times. It's so time consuming and not fun. And a lot of people have to do it. If you don't do it, you don't really know whether you should fix that package or not. You need to do that reachability analysis. And up to this point, it was done manually by people, because a lot of the SCA tools out there, they don't do it. They just produce tons and tons of issues with these severity ratings that I always just laugh at. I'm like, what do you know about the context of my application? Severities are meaningless, right? But yeah, this reachability analysis is something we've talked about internally here and very excited about. And I'm glad that Semgrep has incorporated that in their tool. That's going to really set the SCA apart from so many of the big guys out there. So
I feel like that's important. And I feel, so going back to this context thing, and I don't mean to just go over and over and over, but it's when you and I are looking at scan results and we see, okay, so there's 10,000 results for this organization. Like we're never going to fix 10,000 bugs. We're just not going to. And so knowing, okay, so there are threat actors currently trying to exploit things in this library, or our organization is a bank and therefore people are going to try to steal the money. And so all of our apps that handle money, like significant amounts of money, are like, we're going to put those on like a highly sensitive list or a mission critical list. And we're going to treat them differently within our systems. Like if there's a high, but it's in a mission critical app, we drop everything and we fix it. Whereas if it's in an app where, what's the opposite of mission critical?
Not important apps. The ones we don't.
Yeah. Are these things like, how can we handle this, Farshad? Like, how can do we write this manually in a bunch of text documents? Like, can we keep track of these in tools? Like, how can we differentiate which apps are more important?
Yeah, you know, what we did at the bank, and that's what a lot of other organizations do, is they do that initial risk assessment of each of their applications and then assign a tier to them. So we had like tier 1, 2, and 3. Tier 1 were our flagship applications that posed a high risk to the bank. So for those ones, we did everything. We did SAST, DAST, SCA, pentesting, threat modeling, design reviews, the whole thing. Tier 2 were the applications we did less on, and then tier 3, we just scanned them. But then the problem is when you just scan them, what do you fix? Like high severity? A lot of times high severity, when you actually did the risk assessment, it came down to be a low risk, because within the context of that threat scenario, that vulnerability may not be as important. Like to your point, once you add context, the picture is not the same. So that was also time consuming. So often what people would do, they wouldn't triage them, fix whatever was high and medium severity and hope for the best, you know? You need to automate that. And then that's what we've tried to do with Eureka is we ask a bit of contextual information when the application is being onboarded into the platform. And then afterwards, when we do the threat modeling and identify the chains of attack, we're able to present a risk value, at least one that developer can fine tune if they want to, but it helps them, with that initial activity. So they don't have to go and get the AppSec guy anymore and be able to do that on their own.
Can we manually add like, hey, I have some mitigating factors. Like, can I add that in? So for instance, yes, there's SQL injection in this app, but it's all public knowledge that's in this app. And we've recently hardened the server and I'm totally going to fix it tomorrow morning, but like, it's not the end of the world. It's crappy, but it's not the end of the world. Like, can I add, or I have a WAF in front of this or a RASP, or I have the, you know what I mean? Can we add notes? I don't know.
Absolutely. Yeah, they allow people to add existing controls and information about the design of their system. So for each threat scenario, there are 3 things you can add. One is contextual design information. Hey, my system has this already in place. I'm using, strong authentication. I've got TLS, etc. You would put all that as what we call design information and existing controls. And then you can also add a set of preconditions for that threat scenario, saying, hey, in order for this threat scenario to happen, the first step is the developer has to get compromised or they have to be malicious. So then those all get factored into that threat scenario, saying, okay, given that you have these existing controls and these preconditions are required, maybe the risk is low. That context really helps fine tune that. And then now you no longer have to rely on severities. You can actually rely on that risk value, which is much more accurate. And, that really filters out the noise really well. So.
Oh, that sounds good.
Tanya, I was going to say, do we want to maybe, I know the one thing that's just been really confusing for me has been ASPM, CSPM, all this stuff, right? Like your video just resonated with me. When I saw that on LinkedIn a few weeks ago, I was like, someone needs to talk about this because the more acronyms are coming on board all the time, especially with respect to application security. And I know Gartner has said, hey, things are consolidating. Consolidation is the future. You got to bring it all together. But what does that all mean to the audience? Can you elaborate a little bit?
Yes. Do you want to go through the common acronyms one at a time and just explain what they?
Let's do it.
And so to plug again the Semgrep Academy, in AppSec level 1, we define all of these. And then there's exercises to help you learn them. But okay, so first of all, like SAST, so software application, static application security testing. So sometimes called stack analysis. The idea is it's an automated secure code review. That's the most like generic way to say it. Basically, it's a piece of software that analyzes your software, breaks it down usually into components, sometimes called parsing. But basically it breaks it down into components and it looks for vulnerabilities within the software. It tells you, I think that there's a problem here, go get it. And so SAST or static analysis, whatever you want to call it, is an automated tool that helps you review your code and finds lots of bugs for you. And in my opinion, there's 1st generation and 2nd generation stack analysis. So 1st generation is they do symbolic execution and flow analysis, so symbolic execution is pretty darn slow because it goes every single possible place, including places your code could never actually go. And it has a lot of false positives, but it will find everything under the sun. I found some impressive things. But the first time I ran a 1st gen SAST tool, I kid you not, Farshad, we started it Tuesday and it finished Thursday.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I've been there.
Yeah. So then 2nd generation SAST, which is what Semgrep does, is it does flow analysis still. So it still checks, to see, okay, I got this information. It's a source. So I got information from the user or wherever. And then later on, I sync the information, I use it. And in between those two, did I validate that this data is safe to use? And either you did, and then you're cool, or you didn't, and you probably have cross-site scripting.
There you go.
But the other thing they do that's very, very fast is they do anti-pattern matching. So those are the rules I was talking about earlier. So basically, let's say there's a function is no longer secure to use, it has problems, or like you can even pattern match for there's no input validation or there's no output encoding, et cetera, et cetera. And so this pattern's always bad. And it's called Semgrep because it's similar to the grep command in Unix. It's lightning fast and it just runs these, I think it's around 2000 rules very, very quickly. And then, so they say seconds, but it's taken at least 1 minute when I run it. But compared to starting Tuesday and finish Thursday, it's very fast.
Very fast.
And then it tells you, like, I think I found these bugs. So first gen and second gen. Did you want to do dynamic? Like
I want to ask you a question.
Okay.
What we talked, so SAST will scan my source code, right? But most modern applications, they're composed of two parts. One is the code that I write, and then the other is the libraries that I get from everybody else. So people often make the mistake. They're like, hey, I got static analysis, I got SAST, and everything's good. I'm like, no. You have a modern application, there's about half of your app is other people's libraries. SAST is not going to scan that. So maybe we talk about the solution for the other half of the application.
Yes. So that is generally called software composition analysis, which is shortened down to SCA, or software supply chain security. So
there's also OSA. There's so many different names on that one.
Or OSS.
OSS.
But basically so usually people call it software composition analysis, but Semgrep decided to name it software supply chain security. But whatever you want to call it, it's basically checking all those libraries to see if there's vulnerabilities in them. And then ideally to find out if those vulnerabilities are reachable from within your application. And you know what, Farshad, they estimate it's 80 to 90% of your app is actually libraries and packages.
Oh,
and
wow. That high.
Yeah. So we're writing less and less code now. And so software composition analysis basically checks all the code you didn't write. And SAST, or static analysis, checks the code you did write. And then you have a complete look at all the written code. And I see there's a question in the chat, Jordan, so do you want to do that one first, or do you want to do DAST first?
Maybe let's continue talking about the tools, and then we can talk about how they all come together through ASOC, ASPM, and all that. But yeah, Tanya, at that point, I think at a minimum, developers should be doing SAST and SCA, because if they don't do both of them, they don't have full coverage, right? At a minimum. And then I usually recommend to augment that with DAST. So yeah, please, let's talk about DAST as well, which has been the bane of my existence for the last few days, but we'll talk about that some other time.
Yes. Okay, so dynamic analysis means testing your app while it's running. So you're interacting with the actual application. And this can mean an API, a serverless app, whatever it is. And so you can use a DAST, which is a dynamic application security testing tool. You can use a fuzzer. You can use a web proxy if you want to do manual testing. You can use one of those API security scanning tools, and they're all giving themselves different names. So basically, I just call it an API DAST or an API fuzzer, or like it sounds silly, but basically the traditional DAST, in my opinion, they really suck at scanning APIs, and they're even worse at single page web apps. Like if it's just all JavaScript, they're just like, I don't know what to do, help. And so I tend to use a DAST on traditional web apps like monoliths. And then if I'm going to do something where there's a front, like there's just a front end and it's dumb, it's just very pretty and dumb, and all the actual logics in the APIs, I get an API tool and I test it with that. And then I use a manual web proxy to go through and actually like just punch, and get my point across.
Totally. And I find with the API tools, the ones that support open API documentation, they can work pretty well if the development team has their open API or the API documented. But the problem is many dev teams, you go, hey, do you have a Swagger or open API file? They're like, no. I'm like, oh, then, so the next question I usually ask is, well, how does your QA team automate their testing? They're like, oh, we have a Postman collection. But again, that's not everybody. Not everyone has a Postman collection. Not everyone has a Swagger file or open API documentation. And then if you don't have that, you're not going to get, well, I mean, you could manually explore the application and create your own map and try to make it happen. But ideally, what I tell developers, I say, document your API, make sure you have that open API documentation, because not only does it help you with automating the security, but also doing your own QA automation and other things. So, but you can only push so far. Not everyone listens. Not everyone has that documentation that you need, right? So
it's so true. So then looking at Jordan's question. So his question is ASPM supposed to replace ASOC? So ASOC, application security, orchestration, and correlation. So that's what we started with as an industry. So you bought a bunch of AppSec tools and it sucks up the results and shows you a dashboard, which is very valuable because I used to do that with MS Excel. Like I would just be using Microsoft Excel all day long.
So did I.
Right? I'm doing VLOOKUPs like nobody's business.
Nightmare.
Right? So then that was much better. And stuff like Defect Dojo, which is still available for free, can do that for you. And you can see some reports, and like it's way better than manually creating reports. But then ASPM came along. So I like to think of ASOC as a toolbox, and you could put your tools in it. But then ASPM is like a toolbox that has a whole bunch of tools that come in it. Like when I first moved out of my parents' house, they took me to the tools, like to IKEA, and bought me a few things. And one of the things they bought me was a toolbox that had a certain number of tools in it to start. And so an ASPM is like that, where it will suck up the results of the tools you have, but it also comes with usually a dynamic scanner, a static analysis scanner, a software composition analysis. It checks your licenses, it checks your infrastructure as code. And there's usually some other things it does. And then on top of that, it tries to provide some context for you. So it's like, hey, this app is marked as mission critical, or hey, this is doing this, or this is doing that. What do you think, Farshad? Am I right with like the empty toolbox versus?
That's pretty bang on. Yeah. And it's funny too, because they keep coming up with these acronyms and the industry keeps moving. And I guess, was it last year? Gartner was like, ASPM is now replacing ASOC. It's like that ASOC is not a category for them anymore. The direction of the industry is to go to ASPM. I'm like, okay. But you know, it's at the end of the day, like what matters is, are you able to get contextual data, and are you able to bring everything together centrally and have that, you know, full visibility, that single pane of glass. And then further being able to thread model, which is a lot of these platforms aren't addressing. So they've come so far up to this point, but then they kind of leave you hanging. They're like, oh, what about the thread modeling? Oh, you still got to do that manually, or go to this other platform. And, you know, so that's a bit of a gap that we're trying to address by creating that complete picture, saying, hey, great, we've come this far. You got this ASPM, we got some tools built in. You can bring your own tools, and we can correlate and aggregate the vulnerabilities and help give you context. And we can let you identify actual threat scenarios with risks that can, you know, compromise your application. So that is the full end-to-end picture, something that I wish I had back when I worked at HSBC running that AppSec team, because the same as you, I had spreadsheets galore. And then once a month, the, you know, head of application security would knock on our door. Hey, can I have the monthly top 10 risk report? And then we would all scramble between our spreadsheets trying to copy and paste really quickly. And we just produced a lot of erroneous data. And I remember thinking to myself, I'm like, you know, I have to do this, but do they realize I'm giving them a lot of data that's just not very useful? But they didn't care. Some at the top, they were like, we got reports, that's great. We got some numbers, they send it to some other people above them. And as long as they had stuff to satisfy the monthly metrics, they were happy. But me down below, I was looking at this and I'm like, this isn't good data, but I have to give you something and I don't have tools. So spreadsheet is the best I can do it. Jordan, yeah, TPS reports, 100%. Thank you. That's what it becomes. That's what it literally becomes. It becomes useless data. But with hoping to automate it and reducing the noise and giving more meaningful data faster is what we're trying to achieve with Eureka.
I remember when I was a CISO, we had to write these silly reports each week. And at one point, I was just so frustrated creating these reports that I didn't think gave value to upper management. I changed the name of the report to TPS report.
Did anyone notice?
No one noticed. So
Oh,
we're referencing a movie called Office Space, and that's your homework. If you are too young to have seen Office Space, that is homework from me and Farshad. You have to go and read that now and watch that.
It's mandatory. Hackers and Office Space for everyone in the audience. You got to watch those.
Yes. I also wanted to talk about just briefly. So I teach about metrics in the AppSec Foundation courses, which are coming out in Semgrep Academy shortly. And when I teach about it, I teach that there's two reasons we need metrics and data. And one is so we report up to management and they think we're cool and they continue to employ us and they don't fire us all, because none of us wants to get fired. But the other reason is because you and I, all the AppSec folks listening, you can take those metrics and then you can do a way better job. You can tell if your program's working or the opposite of working, right? Like we can tell if our tools are helpful. We can tell if like none of the devs log into this, none of the devs fix those bugs because they keep marking them as false positives, we'll throw that tool in the garbage and get one that freaking works.
I'm glad you bring that up, Tanya, because we have a number of clients that always ask us, hey, I'm rolling out a DevSecOps program, AppSec program, what metrics should I measure? So this would be really helpful. Be like, hey, these are the metrics you should measure if you're rolling out an application security or DevSecOps program. So yeah, I'm really excited about what you're putting out there.
Yes, I feel so. I have a conference talk about it too, because I'm obsessive and I can't stop. And then I wrote a bunch of blogs, and this is what I'm like. When I get excited about something, I just like blah, lots of content. But I feel like, so when we look at some of the scanners, it'll say stuff like, oh, you know, you had 40 bugs, but now you have 30. Or like the old ASOC tools, what they would do is they'd be like, oh, like last month you had 40 bugs, but this month you have 70 bugs. But it wouldn't tell you the story. Yeah, you implemented a new scanner and you scanned across your entire code repository. And yes, now you have 30 more bugs in that you're keeping track of. But those bugs were there before. Now we have the ability to see them. So this number going way, way up is actually us being more awesome. We're doing a better job because now we're aware of these things, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, totally. That can actually throw people off. That's a really good point. And I see a question, is free Semgrep only for personal use? What about small organizations? Correct me if I'm wrong, Tanya, but the community edition can be used by anyone out there. And in fact, we include that in the Eureka, all Eureka editions include that community edition of Semgrep. And it's a great way to start. Highly, highly recommend if you don't have any SAST tools, grab the community edition, or better yet, contact me. We can give you a license of Eureka, and that comes with the Semgrep community. And then once you get going with it, as you address the issues and you're getting value, then you upgrade to the team edition. And as Tanya was saying, that gives you the ability to do the call flow analysis across your different source files, and gives you more powerful rules as well that just dig deeper into your application, and it does it really fast. So
I actually have a small,
did I do a good job
have a small
advertising?
correction.
Yeah.
So if you have a small org, you can actually use Semgrep Pro for up to 10 developers for free. So forever.
There you go.
Now, why is it forever? I don't know. I talked to our team and I'm like, I know we have hearts of gold, but do we have to give the gold away? But apparently for free forever, you can just use the pro version if you just have 10 devs or less. And so if you're a startup and you have only 5 or 6 devs, so I've seen organizations do this where what they'll do is they just have one team that has the mission critical app, and they'll just use Semgrep Pro on that. And then they'll use the Semgrep OSS, which has good results, but not as good results. And it can't do the cross file and other things in it. You can't do SSO and all of that. But so you can use for free the pro version for up to 10 people. So if you're in a very small org, you're fine. And I like that because, so I know we only have 3 minutes left, but we were talking about how security is like pricing out. It's so expensive that small orgs can't do anything. And like startups are like, oh, well, we can't afford a $100,000 tool. And so I feel like there's not an excuse anymore. Right. When it's like, so if you're really small, you can still use us. Exactly. Like the pro version, the real version of all 3 products for free. And so I realize like eventually you'll grow and blah, blah, blah. But ideally by then you're making tons of money.
And you have a lot more people. Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
And that's a good point. That's what we've tried to do the same thing. Our the standard Eureka version has the community Semgrep, and it's priced for really small organizations because, to your point, some of the tools in the hundreds of thousands of dollars are beyond the reach of a lot of startups. And we recognize that, being a startup ourselves, and a lot of our clients being startups, we recognize that, and we try to help. We try to help do what we can. And I reckon there's just a couple of minutes left. And are there any other questions? Thanks for sharing that link again.
I have a question for you. So if you could have people remember just one thing from this webinar that is important, what would it be? Besides buy our products. Other than that, what would it be?
One thing to remember is make sure you got coverage. Make sure you got at least your SAST and SCA at a minimum. Make sure you're doing that. If you're not doing that, you're blindsided. Companies do an annual pen test. That is not enough in this day and age. Number one, pen testing is not enough for apps. Pen testing has to be augmented with code analysis, design review, threat modeling. OWASP's testing guide says that very clearly, but not many people read it. And all they do is pen test once a year. That leaves you blindsided to all the 0 days that are coming out every day. If I told you, Tanya, hey, you have antivirus on your computer, could you turn it off and only turn it on once a year? You'd be like, Farshad, you're crazy. I'm not going to turn on my antivirus once a year. It's got to get the signatures every day. It's going to be up to date, new viruses, right? Why do we do that for our software? Why do we do an annual pen test, which is A, not enough, and only done once a year? So really what you need is continuous coverage, minimum SAST and SCA, and augment that with an annual pen test. Better yet, maybe do that a couple of times a year, but then identify what is covered through automation and then cover the rest of it that you can't automate through your manual testing. Now you got the proper coverage. So I know it was a little bit longer than the one thing, but I think that's a really important message to leave this the audience with.
I am totally stealing that from now on. Like, would you only turn your antivirus on once a year? I'm stealing that. I'm going to use that from now on. That's brilliant. Okay,
Awesome.
so rather than me say a takeaway, I'm going to answer Esther's question. If we only have one budget, do you suggest pen test or bounty program? Not bug bounty program. You're going to pay $12 trillion. If so, you should have where you've run all the scans and you've fixed all of those things before you even consider doing a bounty program, because otherwise someone's going to run a free scan with Semgrep or something else. They're going to find 400 things that you could have found for free, and they're going to submit them to you for $500 a pop. And you're going to pay $30,000 for something you could have found out for free in an hour.
Exactly. And I'll just add to that, if you had one budget, I wouldn't even focus on pen testing. Pen testing, again, as per OWASP guideline, doesn't really give you, when it's an application, it's expensive and it doesn't give you anything meaningful. It's better to spend that money on code analysis. If that is your money way better spent, it can dig into it, look at the call flows, tell you some meaningful stuff. Whereas pen testers, they'll come back with a bunch of severities. At best, they'll give you risks. And they won't be able to dig into the whole thing because by definition, pen testing requires the pen tester to know vulnerabilities to exploit them. But if you wrote that code, the vulnerabilities aren't published. So how are you going to go know the vulnerabilities to exploit them? And that's where you got to go into the code, which is where static code analysis, software composition come into play. So that's a way better money better spent. And we could leave it on that note. But
yeah, for the same amount of money for one pen test, you could SAST all of the apps at your entire org. That's why, because of scaling.
Yeah.
But okay, so we're totally over time. I'm sorry. Okay, so thank you, everyone. Please consider signing up for the Semgrep newsletter so I can invite you to the Academy in about a month when it opens. And I want you to follow Farshad on social media. So you can follow him on LinkedIn. Can we follow you on Twitter too? What's your Twitter handle?
Yeah, we got Farshad Abasi and /SEC. Both of them end up in me.
Awesome. And also follow me, SheHacksPurple, and also Semgrep. And come to our next webinar, both of our webinars. Definitely. I think those are key takeaways. I
really enjoyed our conversation, Tanya. I think we could have lots of these. And just for the audience as well, if you're interested in trying out Eureka, just reach out to myself and we can give you a trial license, and it comes with Semgrep as well. And you can give it a try and see how much better you can address your security vulnerabilities in your applications.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. And thank you so much, Farshad, for making time for me. This was so fun.
Thank you as well.
I can't wait to see you.
Love the conversation, Tanya. Take care. We'll talk to you soon. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for attending.
Bye, everyone.